Hi everyone, it's Miss H, and today we're going to be looking at our introduction to energy. So this is actually going to be several videos. Today we're just going to go over an overview of what energy is and kind of the various types. Our next video will be about thermal energy, and then our final video will be about kinetic energy and potential energy. So what is energy? Energy is the ability to do work. So energy and work are very closely related. If you recall, work was the transfer of energy. In fact, you really can't have one without the other. Both energy and work are measured in joules. There are several types of energy. They break down into two main categories. The first main category is potential energy, and potential energy is any energy that is stored. And there are various ways that we can store that energy. The first is with gravitational potential energy, which is stored due to height or position above the surface. So the higher up that something is, the more gravitational potential energy it has. Okay, this is something we're going to talk about in a lot of detail in our next video, or not our next video, sorry, 2 videos from now. The second is elastic potential energy. Elastic potential energy is energy that is stored due to shape. So when you stretch or compress something, like pulling out a rubber band or compressing a spring, those are examples of elastic potential energy. Chemical energy is stored in the chemical bonds. So this is how we store energy in our bodies and how we store energy in batteries and that sort of thing. So when you make the bonds, you store the energy, and when you break the bonds, you release the energy. And then our final type of stored energy or potential energy is nuclear energy, which is stored in the nucleus of the atom. And during nuclear reactions where you have the nuclear fission, nuclear fusion, those sorts of things, then you have your nuclear energy being stored or released. The second big category of types of energy is kinetic energy. Kinetic energy is the energy associated with moving things. So this is another one that we're going to talk about in great detail 2 videos from now when we talk about how to calculate kinetic energy. But for now, just knowing that it's associated with moving things is sufficient. The first type of kinetic energy is electrical energy. This is the energy associated with flowing electrons. So anytime you have electrons that are flowing, like through a wire, then you have a form of kinetic energy. This is one we're going to talk about a lot in our last unit on electricity and magnetism. And then electromagnetic energy is the energy that moves in waves and is associated with changing electrical and magnetic fields. So we produce electromagnetic energy by making changes to an electrical or magnetic field. We'll talk more about this later in this unit when we talk about waves, but also in our last unit when we talk about electricity and magnetism. So now there are also a couple of types of energy that are combinations of both kinetic and potential energy. So mechanical energy is the sum of the kinetic and potential energies of an object. So if you have something like you are walking on a balance beam, or a bird is walking along a wire, like a telephone wire, something like that. That would be an example of having mechanical energy, because it's both moving and it's above the ground, so you have both kinetic and gravitational potential energies. Thermal energy is the energy that we associate with heat. We'll talk a lot about this in the next video, but thermal energy is more like the kinetic and potential energies at the microscopic or at the atomic level. So how are the atoms moving? The last thing we want to talk about with this overview is the law of conservation of energy. So anytime we talk about the law of conservation of anything, it means that we are saving it. So the law of conservation of energy states that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change forms. So the energy will convert from one form of energy to another. So for example, when you have something that is falling, you are converting from gravitational potential energy to kinetic energy until it hits the ground, and then it converts to another type of energy. When you eat your food, you're converting the chemical energy in the food into chemical energy stored in your body, and then you use that chemical energy stored in your body to be able to move, so that turns it into kinetic or mechanical energy. So most of the time these energy conversions go completely unnoticed. So when we are eating our food, we don't recognize that we are converting energy from one form to another, and we don't recognize that that's actually happening in our bodies to convert it into something that allows us to move, but it still happens. So let's take a look at a quick example of energy conversion. So when you're riding your bike along a flat path and you stop pedaling, the bike eventually comes to a stop. And the bike was moving, it had kinetic energy. Since that energy couldn't be destroyed, where did it go? So again, you can't just have energy randomly pop out of nowhere or disappear into nowhere. So what happens with that bike that was moving and stops? Well, even if you don't hit the brakes, there's still friction between the tires and the road or the path. And so that friction converts some of that energy, that kinetic energy, into thermal energy. So that frictional force does work to convert the energy, that transfer of energy there. And so it transfers it from kinetic energy to thermal energy when you have the friction between the road and the tires. So that kind of gives us a good overview of energy. Again, our next video, we're going to specifically be looking at thermal energy and energy transfers. And then the video after that will be looking at doing calculations with gravitational potential and kinetic energies.